And then it is my great pleasure to once again welcome Leon Kluge. Leon is an internationally renowned landscape designer who was born and raised in the Lowveld. He studied landscape design in Israel and began his gardening career in the Comoros. He has since designed and constructed gardens all over the world, for clients such as Disney, the United Nations, and the Botanical Gardens in Korea. He has won many awards, including the Best Designer at the Philadelphia Flower Show and multiple gold awards at the Chelsea Flower Show in London. And I'm very excited to look forward to seeing the Richtersveld in bloom. So over to you, Leon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you again a year after I've given my last talk. Yeah, it feels like yesterday. The talk I'm going to give you today is something that was it was a really special event that happened this year. I mean, the Cape had so much rain. We haven't seen so much rain for many, many, many years. And it wasn't only just here in the southern tip of the peninsula of the Cape. The rain also went up north towards where the deserts were. And when the flowers started to peak and it seemed like it was going to be a good year, we packed the car and we went up north, and what waited for us there was spectacular. Words can't describe it. And even the photos that I'm going to share with you now can't really describe the feeling and the awe and beauty that we saw when driving through the Richtersveld this year. But I'm going to try my best so to get the feeling of what we saw there. First of all, where's the Richtersveld? Well, the Richtersveld is right up there in the northern corner of South Africa. But as with all the natural areas, they don't only have human-made barriers and borders, it goes into Namibia. And that whole area there is known as the Richtersveld. Now, the Richtersveld is a mountain desert. Not many mountain deserts in the world, but this is surely one of the oldest ones. And what makes this one so special and why we need to take so good care of it is it's the most biodiverse mountain desert on Earth with the most plant species. It doesn't on first glance look like it, but again, with all good things, when you put in a little bit of effort and you look closer to the ground, you see the immense richness that this special spot, it's literally just a dot on Earth, has to offer for us, especially botanists. So, as I mentioned before, we had a lot of rain this year, and our rain comes in the form of cold fronts. And usually the peninsula, where I am now, Franschhoek area, we get a lot of rain. Can get up to 1,500 millimeters in a year. But the cold front, as you can see in the image there, starts to peter out the more north it goes. And usually, whilst it's raining here in the southern part of the Cape, the northern part has a nice sunny day where you need to put on a little bit of sunscreen. But this year, it was a little bit different. So the Richtersveld has an average of about 0 to 100 millimeters a year. And you can see the massive difference that you have in the Cape when it comes to rainfall. And that also makes our biodiversity, especially in plants, so spectacular because how diverse our rainfall is in this area. So the Richtersveld is, as I mentioned, very dry. And with all areas with rainfall, as farmers can say, it's very unreliable. One season you might have a lot, and then you plant, and then suddenly it stops, and all your seedlings die. But there's a reliable source of moisture in the Richtersveld, and it's in the form of fog. It's quite beautiful when you see it, and it's got a local name. It's called the Malmoki. And these blankets of fogs come from the sea when the cold Atlantic Ocean air meets the warm inland air, and creates this fog that lies very low on top of the ground. And that is how many plants and animals have adapted themselves in strange and wonderful ways to collect that precious moisture, that blanket of fog, and utilize it. And that is kind of their living blood. Now, this fog doesn't last long. It covers the dunes and the rocky areas early in the morning, but as soon as the sun comes out, it burns it off. So that precious little time that is there with the fog needs to be optimized and utilized by the plants. And that is where the cold air comes in, meeting the hot air and creating those bits of fog. And there are interesting animals that's, adapted themselves to harvest all of these moisture droplets, like that beetle standing on its front legs, and then the water condensates on its little body and it drips down to its mouth. And so it gets its drink in the morning. And the gecko is very famous. It's got these big eyes and it kind of stares out into the mist over the landscape. You'll think that he's a deep thinker, but not really. He's just waiting for those droplets to condensate on his eyes, and then his little flat tongue wipes like windshield wipers over his eyes, and so he gets his drink. But plants also have incredible ways of harvesting fog. One of the interesting ones is there on the right hand of the screen. You'll see Gesenia lichtensteini. Now, it's a Gesenia that grows right up there in the north, not in the south, not Namaqualand. Richtersveld is very different to Namaqualand. And it grows in between these quartz fields. And the quartz is naturally a little bit colder. So the fog and condensation happens more eagerly on the quartz stone. And then the droplets would fall down. And then that area would be more moisture than the surrounding area without the stone quartz. So plants, certain ones, have adapted themselves so that they live only in between the quartz. Here's another example of plants harvesting the early morning droplets of the fog. And there's lots. Even you, if you walk down, you can take your tongue over some of these leaves and you'll get a nice drink of water. But one of the most spectacular how can I say, adjustments and adaptations of plants must be the twirly-whirlies. And they don't only range in one family, they go over many families that have adapted into this interesting way of growing. But this growing bed has a few advantages. First, you'll see the Dipcadi crispum. It looks very much like a little tulbachia when it's in flower. Beautiful little thing. And it looks like a slip and slide. When you're little and you go on the slide and you slide down. And that's one of the reasons it has that shape, because the water droplets condensate on that little twirly-whirly. And when it gets big enough, it connects with another droplet and another droplet. And so it slip and slides all the way down to the base of the plant where the roots are. And so it can absorb it. And on the right is Cathylus namaquensis, or a cucamakranca. And it's got the same reasoning for collecting moisture. But as I said, it's over many families. So this is the iris family, for instance, Babiana, namaquensis, and Tritonoides. And they also have adopted this twirly-whirly effect into harvesting moisture. That's not the only reason why they do that. So there's a lot of speculation on the twirly-whirlies. I don't think we'll ever know all the reasons. But as I mentioned, all those coiled leaves, that's to get the water right to the base. But it also, all of these twirly-whirlies over one another, it creates a little bit of shade and it cools down the leaves of the plant. Then it also makes it a little bit more difficult for herbivores to graze, because it doesn't look like leaves. It's seen as just, a mess, to be honest, by a herbivore. So they kind of avoid it and walk past. Coiled leaves are also more elastic. So if there's a lot of wind, which Richtersveld is famous for, it doesn't damage it so badly as what a broad, long leaf would be damaged. Now, there are some icons of the Richtersveld that you always see, no matter whether it's a good year or a bad year. And the most famous must be the quiver trees. Now, there are 3 species that grow there. All 3 quiver trees occur there. And the first one is Allodendron dichotomum. And now this one is the most famous one. It's the most beautiful for me anyway. It's with these golden trunks. It's very sharp if you touch it, all of those little edgings of the bark. And then it's got this beautiful crown. And these trees get really old, but as I'm going to mention later in the talk, is there's certain plants with certain strategies. Like these icons or these large plants of the Richtersveld, they are so big because they store all the moisture within their bodies and can withstand long periods of drought. Now, other plants have different strategies and are not as lucky to become so fat. Now, the other very interesting quiver tree is Alvedendron russussimum. Now, this is the maiden quiver tree, so maiden quiver tree. So it's a small one. It only occurs there. There are quite a lot of them. I don't know. It's not as dramatic as these big ones, but when you drive into a narrow little valley like Helswochte and you see hundreds of them scattered everywhere, it's quite spectacular to see. And when they're in flower, there's lots of little spikes of orange-yellow flowers. And you'll see that a lot of these quiver trees, especially the maiden quiver, when they germinate, as you see on the right-hand side of the slide, they need some help. Like us humans, we also need some help when we are just born, but they also require a nurse plant. So it's best, and you have higher success rate from a seed when they germinate under a little shrub. Not a shrub that overshadows everything and it's quite dark, but a shrub that has got some protection from herbivores and also from the sunlight. And they are usually the success stories. So the nurse plant in some stage of its life would die, but by that time, that aloe would be strong enough and can survive on its own. So there's that interaction between the aloes also and some other plants. Then there's the giant quiver trees, which is spectacular. Not so many to see though. Alodendron pilansi. And they stand out like towers when you enter the Richtersveld. And they never have many stems on them. It's usually just a couple of branches and trunks that go upright. And then, okay, this must be secondly the most famous plant of the Richtersveld is a half-manes, Pachypodium namaquensis. And in spring, they're also in flower. And, you know, other Pachypodiums from Madagascar, it's got these beautiful white flowers, very spectacular. But this one is so different. It's got this yellowy outer side to the flower, and inside it's this almost blood red to almost black color, which is so unique. And the plants are just, you know, iconically our deserts. Now, the story goes that how they got their name, half manes, half human, is that two tribes had a bit of a squabble in Namibia, and the stronger tribe forced out the less strong tribe to the south. And when they crossed the Orange River, they were entering the Richtersveld, which is very dry and very arid, and there's not much for them to eat and drink. So they looked back over the river up north in loving memory of their land that they lost. And the gods took pity on them and then turned them into half people, half plants. And all of them still to this day look north towards where they left their land behind. So that's the long and short of that little story. Now, one of the most famous landscape plants in South Africa, and I guess around the world, is also used a lot where the temperatures allow, is Botanical. So that is our spackworm. Now, in the Richtersveld, there's a different species which look extremely different. You would not say it's a spackworm when you walk past it. It's much bigger, and it's got these tightly packed, tiny, almost look like jelly beans that you eat on the stems, and that's the little leaves. And it's a spectacular plant, but I don't think it's that easy to grow. That's why you can't find to buy it. But what a beautiful one. So if you drive in the Richtersveld, you'll see them very close to the road, lots of them. And that is also a little spackworm. So not just the one species, there's a few. And then it's always nice to see Hoodia gorgoni. Hoodia gorgoni is known as the garb. Now, the tribes that lived in this area long ago, and still today, some people use it, they would take these young shoots of the Hoodia, and then, because they were herders, right? And they were later in their day, otherwise they were hunters, so they would go and far, and whilst hunting the buck that they need to feed their tribe, they would also feel hungry. And this little growing points they would nibble on, and that is to suppress your hunger. Now, the local people told that to the Western world, and especially America took that plant and then put it into pill form. And isn't it incredible how this hoodia is now, in the olden days by the tribes, is there to suppress their hunger. There's not a lot to eat at all. You're very lucky if you have a bounty of a buck that you just killed. So suppressing the hunger. But when it's used in America or the Western world, it's there to reduce your eagerness to eat and not become too fat. You know, the two complete opposites. Now, the hoodia is part of the milkweed family, and most of them have adapted to attract flies. And you see that a lot in the Richtersveld in spring, how they attract the little flies to their flowers. And we all know stapelias. Stapelias are so commonly used as a pot plant, an interesting plant to buy if you're a collector. Now, it's got the hair on to mimic a dead carcass. It's got that scent in the middle, and it's got this riffled and usually carry-on looking color to the flower. Like I said, it's not the only one. There are many of these plants that give you that same effect, because flies are quite abundant in that desert in spring. Now, usually I go to the Richtersveld just about every year, and on an average year, the picture on the left is what it looks like. It looks a little bit like a Mars landscape. Black stone, red and white, sand, brown sand, and one or two little dried out shrubs. But when it's spring, those dried out shrubs have a little bit of flowers to them. And you can see just sparsely spaced, there's some blommetjies, little flowers showing themselves. And that is a nice year. I walk and I see a lot. But this year, when those cold fronts came right over the Richtersveld and drenched them with water, it changed, and changed quite dramatically. Although the photo doesn't look like it's a big forest, if you remember that things are not always as it seems, and you have to bend down and see all the abundance in a micro form, because they're all so small, protecting themselves, but so much to see. And then some valleys in the Richtersveld just exploded with color. This is Armanshoek Valley, so it was quite spectacular. I don't think the public ever is allowed to go in there, but this year, because it was such a spectacle, Sandparks opened it up for the public. If you had a big 4x4, it's the first time I've ever done off-roading 4x4ing, so it was nerve-wracking. But we managed to do it. It was worth every single stressful second on that car. It was spectacular. It was just ombres of color. And a site like this was last recorded, as I understand correctly, in the 70s. So all of those seed, well, a lot of them were sitting waiting in anticipation for the right amount of rain. So all of that dust bowl area is actually full of living little seeds. And that, like the quiver tree, is waiting with the water in its body to grow and be flowering when the good season is coming. And most of the plants are waiting in the form of seed for them to flower and to flourish. But look at that beautiful, beautiful landscape. It's just flowers everywhere. It was, I think, more spectacular than Namaqualand this year. But also remember that these plants, it's, in a sense, they're gambling, because the rain came, but just as quickly as the rain comes, it can disappear, and it can be substituted with heavy, hot wind. So the flowers, you have to time very carefully, because it can take only 2 weeks for it to have a beautiful bloom to having almost nothing. So you have to be in constant contact, I think, with the office there in the Richtersveld to make sure that you time it correctly. On the right-hand side is the Dimophytica, such a beautiful specimen, a bit more of a perennial one. And this is, again, a mosaic of color. And this white looked like snow in between little stars everywhere. And these white plants that you see there, all of those heliophilas, are part of the cabbage family. This is again a picture just to show the difference between an average year, 2022 when we were there, and then 2023, how it's looked like in this year. Now, as I mentioned before, it's a race against time. So once the moisture is sufficient enough, the seeds start to germinate. And they have to do it very quickly, and they have to flower as quickly as possible. Because the sun could kill the little plants, all hungry animals will start to eat them. And they will definitely eat a lot of them, but they are in such mass that some seed do survive. And then the winds in that area is also extremely strong and can damage your little petals. But the winds are also there to help. A lot of the plants and little flowers are pollinated by wind. And then an abundance of flowers also give you abundance of insects. And these little worms were everywhere, especially on the Amaryllidaceae and Asparagaceae family. And then what's so, like I said, opposite is this harsh mountain desert full of hard rocks and sand. But then this Felicia hirsita starts to flower. And it's such a cottage plant. I would see it in a beautiful little dainty garden in the center of London. But here it is in one of the harshest landscapes on earth. Such a delicate little plant. And pollinators are full to the brim when it comes to pollen. So when we walk through the pollen over the flower fields, it is absolutely, well, our shoes are covered in yellow. And that is all just from pollen. So if you are suffering from hay fever, perhaps a Zoom call would have been better with your friends in the flower fields, because you needed your little pilicky with it. Again, Gazania lichtensteini in between the rocks. Such a beautiful plant. Really nice one. A little bit different to all the ones we see every year close towards Cape Town. And this Amaryllis, which also looks very like, similar to a Felicia, but very, very short. It's like a couple of centimeters high. And it just is in fields of blue. All daisy family. And this is what's so remarkable about this desert. Remember that, during the dry season, it seems like there's nothing. So it doesn't matter if you put a plow through it. But come summer or spring, in a good year, you see the diversity that is present there. Here is an area about the size of my hand. And there are 4 or 5 different daisy family members just growing there. So imagine what else is in between. I mean, you can't do that in your garden, even if you try your best, have that diversity. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about these Dimophytica. So the Maculan daisies, lots of different species of them. This pinnatum is just spectacular. It's absolutely beautiful to see. It's the first time I've ever seen it. But these Dimophytica meaning morphed into 2. So these daisies have 2 sets of seed. And the reason for that is the unpredictability of weather. So they make a disc seed, which is those flat ones that you see at the top of the flower. And on the side, they make, in less amount, only a few, they make stick seeds, which are much heavier. Now, the winged seed fly with the slightest breeze and can go into little valleys, and it spread the species over a wider area. It germinates easily, so when the first rains come, they would immediately germinate. The plants are usually less robust, whereas the stick seeds are chunky, they're much heavier, and they land right next to the mother plant. It takes much longer for them to germinate, and when they germinate, they are much more robust plants. Now, why do they have it? So, what if the rain comes, and they all germinate, all those little seeds, the wing seeds, and then the rain stops, which happens a lot? Then that species in big areas will die out, surely. There's no new young to take over. But when that happens and these little disc seeds die, we still have these stick seeds waiting in the soil. They are much thicker, so it takes a lot more moisture for them to trigger that sprout or that germination. And usually when they are triggered to germinate, then definitely there has been enough and sufficient moisture for them to reach adulthood. So this plant has two ways. It's got a backup in surviving weather. This is Dimophytica tragus. This was also beautiful. I mean, if a full mature plant in flower, I can put my hands like almost across it, surrounding it. So big are they. And then blues become a lot more prominent in the evening, and during the day, the yellows and the white are striking in such a way that you almost need to have some sunglasses on. And again, as mentioned before, there's blue and the white, the Heliophilus, are all Brassica family, so it's all cabbage family. So we know canola making up such a show on farms when they're in flower. Well, here in the wild, they do it too. I think this is just much nicer. There you go. The white one, Heliophila variabilis, and then Heliophila trifurca. Opposites, right? Those big quiver trees, old ones, and then the Heliophilas. Two different time frames. I mean, those quiver trees have a complete different sense of time. For them, a few centuries is, a few decades rather, is a few minutes. The Heliophila, a couple of weeks, could be their whole lifespan. And I mean, you have to do a few of these silly selfies. I mean, it's the last time it was in the 70s. So at least, if it doesn't happen again, I do have some silly photos, but it is quite a sight to be seen. And it's not only in the lower valleys where the Heliophilus was very prominent, even on top of the mountains, quite different plants. But here it was the Feiches taking the show, and a spectacular show it was. Some other interesting parts, the snapdragon family. We've got Nemesia williamsoni. We all know Nemesias. It's not every day you see an orange Nemesia. And also such a delicate little plant growing in this harsh environment. Looking on the left, you see that beautiful, it's almost like a rivulet garden, but it's right in the middle of the desert. James Britannia is always a very beautiful annual and perennial to see. And then even some of the shrubs are quite spectacular. Now, this must be the most beautiful Harmonia they are, Harmonia stricta. And usually they only flower after a good amount of rain, but usually I only see a little bit of flowers. It's not completely covered. But now you see these dry little sticks that we saw the year before covered into these umbrellas. And remember, this is hibiscus family. So these flowers are like little umbels, little umbrellas hanging upside down like a hibiscus would do. So a very spectacular sight to see, and a very different color that stands out in the landscape. And again, you need to stand out there in between all of these fields of flowers to attract your pollinator to you. And then Nieuwoudtville, which is the bulb kingdom in the world. But this spring, I think the Richtersveld did just as well when it came to flowers. And just on the way there, we saw a lot of bulbs, erupting out of the dry earth. I mean, even gladiolas. If you are big into gladiolas or iridaceae, you'll have a field day there in the Richtersveld. Although they're very small, they're just as spectacular. This is Gladiolus viridiflorus and Gladiolus arcautus. But the most spectacular one, and they love flowering after a good rain, is Gladiolus deserticola, and it only grows there. But what makes it so different to any other gladiolus is, first of all, I would say the color, but then the shape of the flower. I mean, have you ever seen a gladiolus with a shape like that? And they usually grow on the little inclines next to a stream. And this year they were in full flower. It was little fields of blue. First time I've ever seen it. And then Gladiolus zaccatus. I mean, what a show that is. And it's got these little sugar cups at the base of the flower. And that is what the sugar birds and the sunbirds are looking for. And it's shaped in exactly the way that the little bird would put its little beak into the sugar cup and then get covered with pollen. And it's quite high. I mean, this is almost knee high next to the road. Sometimes you find the most incredible things next to the highway. A little bit dangerous, but anyway. And then some babianas. This is Babiana lobata and La Perusia dolomitica. Ornithoglossums, so your snake lilies, are also very prominent there. And there were lots of them. And what a spectacular, although they're very small, they're only a few, I would say 5 centimeters high, the little flowers are just spectacular, little lily-like flowers. And they've got the droplets on top of the little petals, which shine in the sun. And that glistening reflection that it gives attracts its little pollinator to the plant. This was my favorite one. I didn't see many of them. Ornithoglossum undulatum, like a little crown, this cream flower with the dark tips. I was very excited when I saw that one. And then Tritonia malothe, which is very, very rare to see and only would flower after a good season of rain. And we were very lucky to see them in the field. And then always very elegant bulb, and we have them all throughout the Cape, different species of them, but is the lady's hands, or Cyanellas. So Cyanella ramosissimum must have been the most beautiful one. Tiny little thing, but the color was so bright, and the opposite of the yellow and the pink played so well in the sun. It's quite spectacular. And then Cyanella orchoides, which looks like an orchid erupting out of the desert. And then there's the life in quartz. So our plants, especially the gazanias, have adapted themselves to grow in between these little quartz fields because it's usually a little bit cooler there and they get more moisture. And a lot of plants have adapted themselves to make this their home, like the crassulas. There's so many different crassula species there. It's just was almost impossible for me to count. But look how they love it, and lying down on a little cool bed, it's like a little ice bed in the sun. Talocodon in between, with its little stalks, with its little dried up flowers that flutter in the wind and mimics little ants. And this is a typical outcrop of quartz. And diversity in there is incredible. And remember, quartz also let light through it. So you'll get a lot of algae and bacteria growing in between those rocks, especially underneath. Monsonia multifida, so the geranium family is also well represented there. But you'll see that this Monsonia looks very different to the gewone boesmanskers that we know. It's tiny, and the little leaves on top of the body looks like a mop. It's very hairy with lots of little seeming tendrils. Now that is to literally mop up the fog and feed the plant with lots of moisture. Now this is the more common one, Bushman's Monsonia crassicaulus, and it's nature's fire starters. So the tribes long ago managed to figure out that if you dry some of these sticks of the Monsonia, they have that very thick waxy layer on them, and the sticks become very rock hard. Very interesting texture that it has. But if you put that in the fire, it really ignites it and you get a nice hot fire. Monsonia pattersoni on the Western Karib Desert, and that's the desert that goes just outside of the mountainous area towards the sea and Orange River. So it's more sandy, more duney. And this also grows there in the dunes, very close to the sea. And this was close to the Orange River mouth, and it was in flower right next to the road. It's Pelargonium cypsorpifolium. There I got the pronunciation almost right. It's a tiny little pelargonium. Literally, if I put my thumb next to the plant, it would be just about the same size. Although it seems small for your eye, plant is hiding just underneath the sandy bit. So the plant could be spread out over a meter or so. And all you see is every now and then a little crown of leaves and flowers protruding out of the sand. And that sand that's over the body of the plant, over all its little tubers or under the ground, and that keeps it cool and protects it from sun, wind, and grazes. But what a cute little thing, extremely rare for me to find. I've never seen it before. But again, you have to look very closely to find these little gems. Look how tiny it is. You've got them in the white and you've got them in this beautiful color as well. And there you can see the body of them. And that could be one plant, or it could, well, it could be a baby or two, but it's a bit of an illusion. And Fenestraria, probably one of the most famous little succulents that we have in the desert that grows there. And it's a window plant. So it also uses sand to protect itself and make it cooler and hide it from herbivores. So its leaves are long and upright, but if you take the sand away from the eye, it looks like tiny little dots on top of the soil, of the sand. But it's got a little window in there, like a clearer area, and that funnels the sunlight right down into the leaf where it makes its food. So it protects all the greenery that it needs, all the green bits to make the food, and then it protects it from the animals and the sun. And when it starts to dry out, it starts to look a little bit not so nice, but then it goes underground and it hides, it dries out, and the little eyes also becomes camouflaged. Like I said, the wind there is quite harsh and severe, so some plants use it to their advantage as well. And this is called plants putting body armor on them. You'll see that a lot in the deserts, even here on the west coast, where plants are covered full of sand. And that's not by accident. So plants have a sticky, some plants like the Strumaria or Chlorophytum have a sticky substance on the leaves when it comes out of the soil. And then the sand sticks on it. Now, there's a few reasons for it. First of all, it is, if you are antelope, you don't want a mouthful of sand, right? So it protects them from being eaten. Otherwise, it also gives a layer as sunscreen, reflecting the sunlight and protects it a little bit. It's camouflage, and then it also has a protective layer, which protects it from sandblasting, especially there close to the coast where the wind is very severe, and then the sand that's blowing all over it could damage your leaves severely. So it's a way of protecting itself. And then these plants are on a different time scale. So the big ones that I mentioned, the icons, they go through many bad years. For them, it's just a minute or so on their time clock. Whereas all the annuals and some of the perennials have a much different outlook on a time scale. And for them, a short period of time is that they have to germinate, flower, and die, and then wait again as in the form of seed. And we as humans, we get to about 70 years old, and we can't think of a time scale of the dichotomas, these big aloes. It's not relatable. And the same is also with these annuals. So they see all of these temperature changes and droughts going up and down. But for us, seeing it in our lifetime, it might be very severe, and they might have seen it a few times. One sad thing to see is, if you go up Helshoogte Pass, is the Alopeosones of Helskloof. Now, it was always a big feature for people to go and see them in flower in midsummer when it's so hot, and you've got these fields of yellowish flowers going over the mountaintops. Quite spectacular. These plants grow very slowly, and they're quite old. But now, due to climate change, I say most of the cases, most of them have died. And there's only one or two that seem like they have a bit of life in there, but when you look closer, it also doesn't seem like it. And here you can see a picture that was taken in 2022. And here's a picture in 2023. So those mountains that you see there in the back, for those of you that have been there, were absolutely covered with thousands, if not maybe 100,000 of these aloes. And, you know, a long-term drought, which they had from 2010, I think, to about 2018, which they didn't have much rain at all, was starting to take their toll on these aloes. And most of them are dying, not just only from this drought, climate change, but also from overgrazing from some livestock in there. But here you can see on the right-hand side that you have these aloes, again, on a different time scale, and they go over a few droughts and then a few springs. And if you only have one good year, that's not going to save the aloe. You need a lot of good years for the aloes maybe to have a few that recover. But when it comes to the annuals and tiny little shrubs, one season makes all the difference. And here they are in full flower, and there'll be tons of seed lying in the soil waiting for a next good year. This one, this Alopisonia on the right-hand side, was one of the last good-looking ones. And good-looking ones is not really the word to use. I don't think this plant will survive. It's quite sad. And then some plants, like that Allodocotomus that I talked to you about, use nurse plants, but some plants use the rocks as their protective layer when they're tiny babies. And the half-mens does that very, very well. So one of the seeds hopefully falls into a crack that can sustain life with a little bit of grit and maybe a bit of extra fog that falls there, and starts to grow slowly but surely, protected from the sun, in the shade, it's cooler there, and then erupt to become this very big plant in many, many, many years. And you'll see lots of plants utilizing that method of survival. This Lariacia Malotti and this Conophytum. Conophytum is very famous for doing that, growing into these cracks. And that's also a plant that's poached so much by people. And pelargoniums. Lots of pelargoniums in flower. I wouldn't say this desert is got so many species. This is my favorite. So Primorsum, he's got these beautiful lines going to the center of the plant where the purple is. And it's a big flower. It's like, okay, I would say about 4 centimeters big. So for the pelargoniums in that area, that's huge. And it's quite a sight to see when you see them. And they're usually also under shrubs or together growing with a shrub. But livestock also loves munching on them. So you don't see a lot of them. And this is a very interesting pelargonium, Klingartense. And this is a pelargonium that grows in the cracks of the rocks. And it's got this thick little stem. It's deciduous in the summertime, so it doesn't lose too much of its moisture. But those thick stems erupt in leaves in wintertime, and these flowers, these star-like white flowers, come out and they smell beautiful. One of the only pelargoniums with such a sweet scent. Now, there's a lot of challenges that face the Richtersveld, let's be honest. I think there's a lot of challenges that faces a lot of the world. But this is such a delicate space on Earth. I mean, it took millions and millions and millions of years for that little layer of soil to become conducive to plants. And it's so easy to destroy by humans. Climate change plays a very big role, and even some of the big ones can't withstand it. I mean, they have their backup as their trunks and store all of those liters and liters of water. But a prolonged drought that we had here between 2012 and 2019 approximately was also just too much for a lot of those aloes and big icons. And even the temperature rose by an average of 2.9 degrees, which is massive for this area. Yeah, plant poaching. That is a very sad reality, I think, with such delicate areas, because there's always people that want the rare stuff or the plants that's difficult to grow, or people that just put it in. I've seen online where people in countries like Japan and China brag about their plants that they get from Madagascar, And all they do is put it in a beautiful little pot in a store and then sell it. And once it dies, it's just replaced with another. Although here, where they took it out of the ground and then smuggled it over to those countries, it took sometimes hundreds of years for that plant to become that size. And severe overgrazing. So remember, how drier it gets, the more or the less delicate the grazers become, because they're hungry. So they'll go for anything, like the Alopeosone, if it's really, really dry and greenery is very little to be found. So that also makes a lot of stress on the landscape. And then mining. There's so many mines there, and I think there's a lot of permits given for a lot more mines. But as I mentioned before, that delicate layer of soil that's on the top of the earth in that area took millions of years to achieve exactly the components that's needed for the plants to grow. And a lot of plants have adapted only to grow in those little pockets of soil that are different. So if you put a plow or a machine right through it, you disturb that component of the soil, how it works. And you can never get that back. No matter how much somebody tells you that they can rehabilitate the area and just scrape it clean and plant some plants, it's not possible. So one grader or one machine or one mine can destroy a lot of species of plants, and it's quite sad to see. And a lot of these plants in the Richtersveld are very small, tiny. I mean, you have to lie on your tummy to see them. And these mine heaps are massive, and there's a lot of wind there. So all of these mines and sand and dust falls on these tiny little plants, and they're not used to that. And so they get covered. And that's also a way that we lose some of these plants. And it's always great to go and visit these areas and appreciate what we have there. One of the most spectacular deserts in the world when it comes to plant species. You would never put the two together, that there's so many plant species in this mountain desert, but there are. And this year was extremely spectacular to see all these fields and fields of color, but not only the annuals, even the old hardy perennials and icon plants that just had a sigh of relief. Yes, we had a drink this year. Well, how nice is that? And then perhaps next year there's nothing, but I'm keeping my thumbs that we get a lot. Otherwise, then I'll be there for much longer time. But it was a very special show, and I don't think a lot of people have seen this spectacle in play, obviously, even if you were lucky enough to be there long ago. So when that happens, please go and visit this special part of Southern Africa and experience this display of sunshine and snow almost on the landscape. And that's the talkie, and that's the spectacle that we had this year.
Yeah, Leon, unreal. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, the comments, there's all saying things to have opened our eyes to such a diverse and unique landscape, and to do it with so much passion and care that you've obviously taken to find all of these plants and share them with us. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Pleasure.
Can we go over to some questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
I've got you, so I'll
Okay,
read them out here for you, so that's fine. So let's start with Jeanette. Janet Miller in the UK. She says, I'm in the UK and can see that our weather is changing. We are getting so much rain and don't seem to have many dry days to work outside. Have you seen big changes? Just heard you saying you had lots of rain. Would it make a big difference to have lots of rain every year?
Yes, it would. Like I said, I do think it probably has happened over the centuries, that there would be a few seasons where they have good rains. But now that we had a good season, we have now bulk seed lying in that sand waiting again whenever it comes. So it was needed. And, bulbs can only sit underground, for so long. And we had a prolonged drought for big period of time. And then they also run out of energy. So it's quite important. I personally don't have high hopes for more rain. I think it's just becoming less and less and hotter, but let's hope I'm wrong.
Good. Carly, what is the difference between the Richtersveld and the Namakwa biomes?
So the Namaqualand biome is a little bit more stable. So you are guaranteed to go and see your daisies and your annuals and your bulbs in flower. They get regular rain much more than the Richtersveld. So that cold front still hits them. Maybe not every year in severity, but it does hit them and you get that spectacle. Whereas the Richtersveld, it's a gamble. It might happen, it might not. And also the Richtersveld is... it's much hotter and they are much more reliant on mist, and it's mountainous. I mean, it's just huge, massive. We think Table Mountain is big, but there, when you walk there, it just seems never ending, these outcrops of mountains. So making it very, very different. Plants adapted to this mountainous desert than plants on the flats in Namaqualand.
Awesome. Colin has asked you, which species is most used as a food source in the Richtersveld? I'm assuming by grazers or by what are the main?
So each one has their own. So I would say if you go for like porcupines and baboons, they go for gladiolus, they just love those bulbs. Then you have your normal grazers that go for annuals. So there's grasses are there. Richtersveld is also divided into two sections. They have a winter rainfall area, and then you have a summer rainfall area, which is more dependent on thunderstorms, which is more towards the Namibian side, the Northern Cape, towards, I would say, Uppington side. That's that way. So you have mountains are divided into two. So you traditionally had the herders migrating between all the valleys, walking from the winter rainfall where they get a bit of green and grass, and then going to the summer rainfall, which is not so far away, and then they can graze there for the summer. So there are a lot of grasses, especially in the summer rainfall area, which the big antelope can eat.
Rudy, has asked you, which one, when one bends down, will you find the so-called living pebbles stone plants at the Richtersveld? And I think you did see those as little window plants. Yeah,
the window plants, you'll find that they are more in the sandy areas. In between the rocks, there's more conophytums, which is in between the rocks. But there's also Gansmiths and some of those very interesting tiny little plants that hide in there. So yeah, you'll probably find.
And then Justine Reynolds has asked, is there a high percentage of endemic plants in the Richtersveld? And then I can tack onto that with saying, I was wondering how many of the plants that are in the Richtersveld would translate down to sort of other areas, or is it just too specific?
No, it's specific, completely adapted to that area and that area alone. So all the way from Steinkopf to southern Namibia is a region on its own. And there are plants that have adapted to one little outcrop on a mountain. Some of the Amaryllis family, and they're nowhere else on Earth. And most of the plants there are nowhere else. When you go to Namaqualand, that's different plants, and that stretches far. But that little piece there, with that immense amount of diversity of plants, is only there.
Wow. Needs to be protected.
Maureen. Needs to be protected, yeah. But
it's difficult. Yeah. Maureen Roberts has asked, thank you, Leon. Managed to watch in spite of load. Oh, that's a more comment from Maureen, not a question. Thanks, Maureen, for your comment. Justine has asked, how long can the dormant seeds that are waiting for the rain remain viable? Is it species specific, or is there a general rule of thumb?
I don't think it's a bit species specific. So some of the seed can stay there for a very long time, and obviously some of the bulbs too. But the bulbs, a lot of them will flush when there's just a slight bit of moisture coming in. But many years. And I also just want to mention that if you are at the Richtersveld and you stay in one of the camps, please go and visit the little nursery at the entrance and go and see Peter van Wyk. He's the curator there and the botanist of the Richtersveld, and he does an amazing job of protecting the plants and studying the plants. And I don't think you'll find a more interesting person, and a person that cares so much about the Richtersveld flora than Peter. So support him also.
Great. Ronnie's got a few questions here. I'll just tie them together. Is Kirstenbosch trying to preserve the plants, any of these plants in its hothouse due to the survival being so much in doubt? And what was this year's average rainfall? And a personal question, Leon, will you be at the 2024 Chelsea Flower Show?
Okay, a lot of questions. Okay, so yeah, Sandby is trying their best. Remember, the problem with Sandby is in a conundrum because there's so much poaching going on that most of the botanists are kept busy in court cases, and they can't actually go into the field to study, to protect, to document. So they just sit in court cases trying to get the people behind bars, which is also difficult because the people that are caught doing it are not, they're just the ones that act on it because they were given money. The masterminds behind it is on another continent somewhere. So it's really quite sad how our botanists are kept busy by paperwork instead of going to the field. And there's so much plants stolen that they don't actually have time or space to plant everything in glass houses and to get time to go and replant it. Sometimes you can't replant those plants back into the wild. It's just, it's gone now. It's so delicate. We as humans, we don't understand that delicacy. We just take a pill and we feel better maybe. Plants don't work like that. And then Chelsea. Now, Chelsea, we're trying our best. Me, Keith, Kirsten, and Marinda, we've got a few. Grootbos is now part of the team that's going to Chelsea. We've booked our spot at the Chelsea Flower Show, but we're still waiting for a few more sponsors to help us to get to the funds we need. So we have a few, we have 3 already, but we need more. So if there's anybody that knows of a company that can give us some money, then we can take the fynbos back to Chelsea. But so far, so good.
That's great to hear. Miriam has asked you, what time of year do you recommend we visit and which areas are usually open to the public?
Okay, so early spring, I'm talking late winter really, when the flowers start to move down from the north. So they open right in the beginning. Before we in the south here at Cape Town even talk about buds opening of Namaqualand daisies, those flowers are already a show. And best is to phone them to see, okay, is the flower starting? And then take them and then do your way. But don't book everything. If you want to see the flowers, doesn't help you book a year in advance because I don't know, I can't tell you. Where the Namaqualand, you're kind of guaranteed you're going to see the flowers. Richtersveld, it's a bit of a gamble. But between July and August, September is way too late. Things are finished by then. And then it's only flowering here.
And then Colin has asked, are any of the Richtersveld plants used by humans as food sources?
It's a good place to go on diet, I would say. But things like the hoodia is used. Not so. They pickle them and they do things with the hoodia, but that's more a hunger suppressant. And to be honest, I'm not so versed on which plants are eaten. I kind of never want to put them in my salad. I just want to see them flower. And also the question in where you can go in the park. So you can really go all the roads in the park throughout the year. It's just that Armanshoek area that's only open, well, only from last year, open when it's in flower and it's a really good year. That's only, and you need a proper 4x4, not a dinky one. Don't take your Jimny. It's difficult to get there, but it's well worth seeing.
Okay. Elsabe Juster has asked, will it not be viable to make more of the seeds or plants available to gardeners to keep them from becoming extinct? And she's talking specifically about gardeners in more arid areas.
Yeah, that is where Peter is doing his best. But it's also tricky. So say, for instance, some of those rare ones, the only way I can think of to protect some of these rare plants from being poached is to flood the market with plants grown by nurseries. But then it's also tricky because now a lot of these plants, they are not allowed to grow. So what do you do? There's now a little bit, two things are fighting one another. But some of the plants like conophytums and the Fenestraria, that little window plant, you can buy now in England. You can go to a common nursery and you can get them there. So those are not so sought after anymore in the Richtersveld. Whereas other plants that are not allowed to grow because now they're very on the endangered list are. And then there's some plants that you just can't grow. You just people, they steal them.
Carly has asked here, I brought conophytum at a nursery in Van Reinsdorp. Would planting them among rocks and gravel assist with their growth and protecting them?
Yeah, it's a good place to plant them. And don't give them too many goodies either. So get a nice crack where it gets full sun in the morning until maybe half afternoon, and they should be very happy. That's the place where they love to grow.
Right. Leonard Schnabel has asked, are any of these plants suited for green roofs?
Green room?
A green roof. So I'm assuming he's talking
green roof.
Small volume soil, the fakies and that type of stuff.
Yeah, some of the fakies, I would say. There are one or two plants that are, commercially grown. But some of these plants are just so specific that your soil composition that you have on your green roof is just not sustainable for these plants. So there's not many, even some of the annuals, and it's not so easy to go and sow them in your garden and they would just grow. We tend to, if you want a Richtersveld roof, I hope your house is in Steinkopf, because if it's in Constantia, it's going to rot in the first week. So our temperatures and our moisture is just so different. Cool. And we should use it for what it is. It's like going to a show. We don't have the cats show in our living room every afternoon. We have to go there and go and see cats on stage. This is it. It's showing. It's at its best right there. Same with the Richtersveld. Don't bring the Richtersveld to your home. No. Go there, go and appreciate it and support the people that are trying to protect it, like Peter.
Amazing. Great advice. And then Toast has asked you, Leon, have you got a plant named after you yet? Think a bit of tongue in cheek there.
I don't. But my dad has. He's got Dyes Kluge is named after him. So that's close enough.
Great. Nathan Finkelstein has asked you, whilst I appreciate your idea that curly, twisty leaves will control water balance, do stomata also play a role? Are there less stomata in these leaves of the plant in the Richtersveld?
Yeah, I wish I could give you a scientific answer there in studies. I didn't study it, but remember, all of those leaves also are, they've got a lot of hair on them. That's why they've got that gray color. And probably the stomatas would only open at night, not during the day.
Right. Tiki Forbes has asked, were there many insects? And if so, how do they survive during the normal continuous dry conditions?
There weren't a lot. That was very recognizable from day one. There were insects, obviously, but I was sitting in a field of flower, like as far as the eye can see, and I could count the little flies and things on my hand that's surrounding me, which is not a lot. I mean, go to Namaqualand and you have to walk like this. So it's very different. And I think that's where wind is very important for pollination there. I think there's some specific pollinators for specific plants. that are more regular every year, like some gladiolus for the sunbirds. But a lot of those annuals, I think wind plays a very important role there.
Well, that's interesting. It's, answering that question is pretty much answered Melanie's question. She was asking, is there a close link between the type of pollinators, or are they quite generalist? So there are obviously some generalists, but predominantly done by wind. And then the follow-up to that was, what do you think will happen if this mismatch between rain events and flowering bloom continues?
Mismatch in the way of that's a tricky one for me now. Look, I think
you can think about it and we can get back to it.
Yeah.
sometimes the best answer is that. Ronnie wanted to find out what was this year's average rainfall in the Richtersveld compared to last year. Do you know offhand, or that's something like we can Google?
I think it was what I'm under correction when I'm talking, but it's probably about 150 mils. I don't think it was a lot more. Maybe in areas it was a little bit more, to about 200 and 300. You could see a lot of damage with water in some of the valleys. So I think in areas it was probably quite a lot, more than they were used to. In some areas, not.
Okay. Miriam, Peter was based he's at the nursery at the Sandparks entrance. Is that where he's based? Correct.
Yes.
And then our last question here comes from Alan. What can we as the public do to support the issues the Richtersveld is facing?
Well, support the park, I would first of all say. And then when I think us as botanists and environmentalists need to also stand up a little bit more if we can. It's not always easy. I mean, money talks in the world when new mining licenses are given to that area. My understanding at the moment is that where the Orange River goes into the sea, that whole area is going to be mined, and they're going to do some heavy industry there. And just for interest's sake, like just behind the police station in that little town, what's that town's name? Alexander Bay. Yes, Alexander Bay. There's the most interesting growing things there, and that little tiny pelargonium that I showed you was growing there. I mean, put one spar up there and then that's gone. And I think the licenses given for mines there is quite a few. And I mean, if we can object more towards those kind of developments, I know you need some economic growth as well, but then also support nurseries that are trying legitimately to sell seed of some of those plants that are growing in that area. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. that helps.
Thank you, Leon. That's fantastic. So do you want to choose your 2 questions that we can...
Oh dear.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I've got a very short-term memory. Can you tell me 2 questions, please?
I liked Carly's question about the kind of fighting from the growing in the rocks.
Yeah, that's good.
And putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
And let's do...
Wasn't there one about wind pollination?
Yes, the different different pollinations. Yes, what is the that was our one here from Melanie Stryker about the pollinators. So those will be our 2 questions, question winners, and then the 2 common questions from Belinda. We've got Retna Bosman as well as Nati Finkelstein. Those will be our 2 comments for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Before we close, I'd like to just thank Leon once again for sharing his passion and his time and his energy with us and to open this world. It was been fantastic. And then a huge thank you to behind the scenes to Belinda, to Chanel, to Sarah, and to Timbiso. Without you, none of this would happen. And we look forward to seeing you all again on the 7th of February for our talk with Chris Dawes, the Fynbos Fabulous, the Fynbos Forum, and wishing you all a blessed festive season and safe new year. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks so much. Thank you, Leon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.